murder. It's generally frowned upon. Or at least it was when we lived in a world where people had values and could feel shame. The act of taking another's life has been a part of our species since we first stepped out of the caves thousands of years ago. And fast forward to the modern day where we do our business in a toilet, it's become very clear that we prefer our dirty work away from our nice clean civilization. But I guess outside of those designated zones or on carefully picked islands, human life has no value. No, damn it. Don't fall into the depression well. Spirits up. Anyways, it's generally agreed upon that killing is viewed as bad and should be saved for the most heinous of crimes. And when it comes to crimes, our friendly neighborhood superheroes find themselves stopping a bunch of them. From the slightly less aggressive ones like purse snatchers, bank robberies, and carjackings, to the more violent affairs like assault, human trafficking, extortion, and murder.
I'll murder you and anyone you care about.
Basically, depending on what the project's rating is, anything can be on the table. And every so often there'll come a crime that is so terrible, one might ask, should the heroes take their villains in alive? Or maybe should they consider putting them in the ground once and for all? But there's one thing stopping them from going that far, and that is the no-kill code. From Superman to Batman to Spider-Man, and plenty more, many superheroes have sworn an oath never to take a life in the hopes of creating a better world. But goddamn, if that pesky restriction wasn't there, then it would at least lower the repeat offender rate, right? Or maybe it's not that simple. So that's what I want to look into today. Should superheroes kill? Why is that so many choose to abstain? And how crucial do I think it is to the archetype itself? So strap on your tactical vest with a skull on it and be ready to call in the battle van, and let's discuss. So many of you know the heroes of today as do-gooders who stop crimes while they're in progress and send the ne'er-do-wells responsible for these transgressions back to whatever hole they crawled out of, often being thrown into whatever prison is closest, where they'd orchestrate some kind of escape and be right back to tormenting the denizens of the tri-state area. It is a cycle of violence so well known to the point of parody, but it wasn't always like this. Because during the original runs starring many of our favorite heroes that we know today, there actually wasn't as much of an opposition to dispatching their foes in all sorts of manner. From Batman using the Batplane to hang his adversaries while also carrying around a gun, to Superman standing by and letting the villains choke to death on their own poisonous gas fumes, to even Captain Marvel taking a criminal from one state to another just so he could get the death penalty. Yeah, that one was pretty dark. Basically, for a time, superheroes would fall in line with traditional pulp action heroes, where death was just something that sort of happened when characters would engage in combat. And you gotta keep in mind that these comics were also coming out around World War II, seeing their heroes participate in the war accordingly. But possibly due to a substantial amount of parental outcry, due to the fact that their kids were reading about these pulpy action heroes, dispatching their foes in a lethal manner, that they would request that editorial would step in and scale back their heroes' more violent tendencies. So even though you might hear people say online, did you know that originally Batman killed? It was actually as early as issue 4 that he began decrying such acts. And this would also go hand in hand with the implementation of the Comics Code Authority in 1954. A code of conduct that many of graphic novel publications would be expected to follow in response to the growing panic over childhood delinquency. And plenty of other smarter folks on this platform have done deep dives into this set of restrictions, but one of the main ones I want to focus on that it forced upon creators is the scaling back of violence that the characters were allowed to engage in, as well as what the story could depict. Though, I'll bet they were still allowed to leave this video a like, comment, and subscribe, but I know that wouldn't have stopped you guys anyways. And though I personally am not a fan of the Comics Code Authority, thinking that it limits the possibility of the kind of stories that could be told, and worry that it promotes a level of anti-curiosity that negatively affects both the art form and the people it's designed to engage with, there are still many good stories that were told during the era it was most relevant, and one such element born out of its heyday is the no-kill code. Since obviously killing and death in general were off the table, the stories found a clever way to justify why their heroes are holding back by creating this in-universe justification for them refraining to use excessive violence. And even over the years and the waning relevancy of the Comics Code Authority itself, this no-kill policy would still remain a staple of many of the characters within this medium.
No guns, no killing.
Where's the fun in that?
Going as so far as they even have updated versions of these classic characters' origins, include this very sacred rule within their very inception. And ever since its implementation, it has been used in a clever number of different manners to, for one, define their heroes, and, as well, give them a back catalog of rogues who get a chance to keep coming back. Because after all, you can't really have a rotating roster of villains if our hero keeps whacking them off. Not like that. So yeah, not only does the no-kill code provide kids a basic sense of morality, but it also further fleshes out the world and provide a rotating roster of villains so that the adventures can continue. But what do I personally think of the no-kill code? Well, on its own, I really don't have a problem with it. For one, I myself don't really like the use of lethal force outside of the most dire of situations, and in addition, I'm just not a fan of capital punishment. Both for the fact that I like to believe in redemption, and I just am not comfortable with the idea of the state deciding who lives and dies. For no other reason than just it's inevitable that some innocent soul will get caught up in the system. And second, I've always viewed superheroes as a mix of aspirational figures and relatable down-to-earth folks who we can identify with. So the idea of a person fighting for a world free of violence, without resorting to using the exact same methods of their opponents, just makes a lot of sense to me.
They saw the ugliness of violence as a solution, and it frightened them. It's so easy. Anger. Vengeance. Luckily, I'm not you. And I never will be.
I also think it just makes superheroes a bit more unique from their contemporary action hero protagonists in that they value all life and are motivated to do good just because they figure it's the right thing to do with the great power they wield. And I'd wager that's the most basic and boiled down purpose of a superhero, that being an individual who goes out of their way to save everyone. And that includes even the person committing these heinous acts, even and especially if that means doing everything within their capability to disempower them and separate them from the citizens they seek to harm. But superheroes shouldn't be principally opposed to the concept of death. That's just insane. Death is, after all, a natural part of life, and I'd like to think should be experienced as a capstone to a life well lived, rather than a punishment carried out by others. And even when they're in a situation where they're backed into a corner and it appears that the only way out is by taking a life, a superhero is the kind of person who can manage to find that third solution, demonstrating that we aren't as limited by the world as we think we are. Yes, it's a bit childish and naive, but I mean, this is supposed to be a world where anything is possible, so why not allow for a little bit of hope through creative problem solving? However, while I think this works well with the more standard inspirational superheroes, you know, the mold that these guys are typically crafted from, I don't personally think it's a one-size-fits-all approach. Because even though I gave that whole spiel about good being good and heroes ought to be doing it, that's not the mindset of everyone else. And the stories should reflect that, with different perspectives on the topic and approaches to how they would solve these problems. And after all, if every single superhero was the same do-gooder with the personality traits I just listed, that would be about as boring as if they were all going around murking suckers who pissed them off. And that's why I'm fine with heroes like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, The Flash, Daredevil, Luke Cage, and a whole bunch of others, stopping just shy of taking their villains down once and for all, while also still thinking there's plenty of merit in characters who don't think the same way, and are willing to go the distance, like Wolverine, Jessica Jones, Moon Knight, and Hawkgirl. Some might also include Deadpool and Punisher, but I don't really consider them superheroes in the traditional sense. And we can't deny the fact that there's also just a lot of fun in watching a character killing a room full of bad guys who you don't give a damn about. And I'm not gonna pretend I'm above such pleasures. Some of my favorite movie characters are John McClane, John Rambo, John Wick, and a whole bunch of other Johns who murder people left and right. Because at the end of the day, it's fiction, and because I don't need a story to align perfectly with my worldview in order to appreciate it. And that goes the same with superheroes. While I do think they're more idealistic than your generic action hero and have a slightly more rigid framework to follow, I'm still okay with writers taking an approach that challenges such constrictions if it leads to a better and more consistent tale being crafted. So yeah, while I do think in general superheroes should have a no-kill code, they need to arrive to this conclusion through good storytelling and not just because it's some kind of an overarching mandate. And that means that there will be characters who don't fit into that mold. So when should the no-kill rule be applied? Well, to me, there are certain characters where it's baked into their very core, and not to include it would essentially just be the same as not adapting them at all. We brought him up a few times today before, but Batman is one of the most obvious examples, having been done in both the style of having his no-kill code intact, as well as, you know, whatever Tim Burton was doing.
You wanna get nuts?
And by not including it, it did feel like a big portion of Batman's mythology was being left out. However, I think the biggest flaw with those films is that the character of the Dark Knight is just not all that deeply explored, because Burton was more fascinated by the villains and the world of Gotham. The other violator of this rule was Zack Snyder, and that's just mostly because I also don't think he was all that interested in the character of Batman, or superheroes in general, at least beyond their aesthetics. Snyder often has his characters violate this restriction, mostly just because it doesn't seem to be what he thinks is all that vital to a superhero, and him and I disagree on that. I also have a trouble time figuring out whether or not he recognizes his importance altogether, considering the fact that when he has other characters like Superman take a life, it's treated as a big deal, until later on when it just seems to be something that they all do without even thinking about it. The no-kill code just needs to be something that's firmly established, or just inferred through the character's actions, but shouldn't just be taken as a given. Hell, even a movie as dumb as Black Adam knew that.
Heroes don't kill.
kill people.
Shut your bitch ass up!
It is, after all, a major identifiable factor in what makes a superhero what they are, and the same goes for those who count themselves amongst these ranks, but also go about violating it. So the no-kill code is something that should definitely be implemented when it's baked into the very character that's being adapted. But there are individuals where it's not necessarily as crucial, and therefore doesn't need to be harkened on all that much. You know, people like the Avengers, a bunch of the X-Men, and even Wonder Woman. In fact, she's one of those popular mainstream superheroes without a kill code, allowing for it to be a major point of disagreement between her and other members of the Justice League. And that's when I think the no-kill code is at its most interesting, when it's something of a point of discussion that other characters remark on, and needs to be justified through an understanding of why our characters do what they do. But since it doesn't need to be the main focus of other stories, so long as it's consistent from tale to tale, then that's all that matters. The problem is, it often isn't. Because listen, once we know what your character is and is not willing to do, you don't have to keep repeating it over and over, but they also then have to kind of stick with it.
When I became a doctor, I swore an oath to do no harm, and I have just killed a man. I'm not doing that again.
Some of these guys are gonna die.
Parker, it's their fate.
So which is it?
Unless they're gonna make a point that they're breaking their rule, but then it probably should be the main focus of the story. It's why it's difficult to get a reading on what many members of the Avengers' stances is on the subject matter, considering the fact that they're all of a sudden 1 minute, oh, we don't take lives, we never trade them, and yet in others, they're just killing people and aliens at their leisure, going as far as to have Captain America wield a gun. And yeah, he's a soldier, and if you're gonna kill anyone, might as well be the bad guys from World War II, but it just makes it hard to get a stance on what the character values. And it just becomes even more confusing when characters like Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel pull these sacred life preservation decrees out of their ass, leaving me wondering who inspired them to think this way. Come on, Peter, you were willing to work for the financial benefactor of the world's most effective militia force, and yet you're unwilling to take the lives of a bunch of interdimensional murderers? Where'd that come from?
And with great power, there must also come great responsibility.
Okay, then why did you let your nephew work with a bunch of murderers?
Activate instant kill!
Damn it, I'm getting off topic. And this is a byproduct of the increasingly shallow depiction of superheroes being simply good guys fighting bad ones, and just having it be assumed that because they're good guys, they don't kill. And yes, I agree, taking a life is bad under any circumstances, even when it's self-defense, still kinda sucks, if for no other reason than you had to personally execute someone. I imagine that carries with it some kind of a burden. But not everyone is going to think that way, and your story needs to be the one to present this worldview if it's something you're trying to illustrate your protagonist's values. And this all comes back to that age-old adage that everything that's relevant in your story needs to be found, within your story. And having a character with such strong convictions that they're willing to risk their own life to defend others, but also being wishy-washy on whether or not they're willing to claim another's life, which, I need to be clear, is something that most people have never done, which is kind of an inconsistent story in my mind. So to wrap things up, I do think the no killing rule is definitely well founded, in that it makes superheroes just a bit more distinct from other folk on similar adventures. The powers and flair are cool, but it's the conviction to use those great gifts to protect others that really define this archetype. And the no killing rule is at the center of it all. And while there are plenty that stick to this old convention, I do think that there exists a few cases where the excessive violence works for the character and story being told. And while I do think in regards to superheroes the no-kill rule should be implemented more often than it's not, it does need to be justified within its given tale, so it doesn't just come across as a cheap way to keep the violence down and more accessible to kids. Because some blood-splattering violence, that never hurt no one growing up. I mean, after all, my parents raised me on a steady diet of Blade, The Matrix, and Terminator. And I turned out... well, I'm still here, ain't I? Hey, thanks for watching, and if you stuck all the way to the end, why don't you check out another one of our videos on screen now. And if you want to chat directly, come join our Discord, link in the description below.